Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of A Conversation With here on the SevereMMA YouTube page. I am Spencer Kite, your friendly neighborhood Spencer man, joined by a fellow Canadian, a fellow Lower Mainland resident. He has more claim to the area than I do. I'm a transplant. He was born here, went away, and came back. He is James Lynch. Thank you for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on. I think we're the reverse because you grew up in Ontario and then lived out here for a long time. And then I lived in Ontario for a long time, but was born here and moved back. I think if we added the years up, we're probably even, Spencer, I think, if I'm being honest. So
let me think here. I've been out here for, how long have I been married? Okay, I've been married for coming up on 14 years. So 14 years that I've been out British Columbia and like 12 island and here.
Okay, so I do have you beat then. I was here going to say I was here till I was 18 and then moved out. Yeah, so that would count longer. But
you got me beat. But we will get to the transplanting parts of these things, these stories, as we progress on. But we start as we always do. James Lynch, when did you fall in love with combat sports?
Season 1 of The Ultimate Fighter. I can literally, when people are like, I don't really remember when I got into it. For me, it was season 1. So you'll appreciate it. See, I can talk Canadian stuff because you'll know what I'm talking about. So I'm in my, I think, second year university, might even, yeah, it was my second year university at Carleton in Ottawa. And I'm flipping through the channels and I see this reality show and this guy is knocking down this door and I'm like, what is this? And it was season 1 of The Ultimate Fighter. Chris Liebman knocks down the door of, I think, Forrest Griffin, that room, because he was trying to find Josh Koscheck. Remember the famous episode where Liebman's too drunk, he's sleeping outside, Nate Quarry's like, stay out of the house, and so Koscheck pours water on him, so Liebman's ready to punch his lights out, and rather than opening the door, he knocks the door down, and for whatever reason that hooked me. And then I just started watching all the Ultimate Fighters and caught up, and I'm like, this is like a really cool sport. And so I just kind of fell in love with it from there. I started watching Pride. I started getting into it a bit more. And then fast forward a few years later, ended up getting an internship at the Fight Network in Toronto, where I was working at the time. And the rest is history. It was kind of like I was planning on being a hockey broadcaster and I took a sharp right turn in university and ended up in this industry. So it's kind of crazy.
Okay, so let's start. And this is where the fellow Canadian in Ontario by birth and all of these things and family in Ottawa can make this interesting. How does a kid from the Lower Mainland end up at Carleton?
So my philosophy was, when I finished school, I wanted to go do something completely different. Like a lot of my friends, they went to UVic, that I went to high school with, and or UBC, and wanted to stay local. But I always had some fascination with back east. I don't know what it was. Like even my dad's from Toronto originally, so I kind of always had like, I don't know, something to do with out east. And so I ended up, Carleton was the only university that gave me a scholarship. It wasn't like a full one, but I got like a part scholarship. And I was like, I'll take free money. And I actually had visited Ottawa in my grade 12 year because I was on a hockey tour, and ended up really liking the city. And I was like, why not? And I had a couple friends actually from my high school that ended up going to that university as well. So I just ended up going there. And then I'll tell you this story. It's kind of interesting. So partway through my degree, I'm like, this is not what I want to do at all. I was there for communications and it was a lot of theory. And I'm like, I want to do like television and all that stuff. Right. So partway through, I went to my like counselor and I'm like, look, like how can I get out of this degree as fast as possible? Because some people would just drop out and let the 2 years go to waste. I'm like, no, I got to get something out of this. So ended up getting what's called like a general degree instead of an honors degree. So I ended up doing 3 years at Carleton, getting a general degree, also minored in poli-sci. A lot of people don't know that. And then I went to Algonquin after, which was still in Ottawa, because I was having a good time in Ottawa. I was like, I don't need to come back right away.
It's a good place.
It is. So I ended up going to Algonquin for 2 years. A lot of alumni come from Algonquin, by the way, if you look at sports broadcasters and stuff. Yeah, I went there. I loved it. It was exactly what I wanted to do. I did a 2-year television broadcasting diploma, was then going to move back to BC right after that. But I ended up getting an internship at the Score television network, which used to exist. And then that's how I made my way to Toronto and ended up staying there for 10 years, met my wife, had my first son there, and moved back here in 2018.
What was the stomping grounds of choice in Ottawa?
So one place that I don't think gets enough love in Ottawa is Kettleman's, the bagel place. It's right across the street from Lansdowne. What's it called now? Frank Clair Stadium. It used to be called Lansdowne Park. I don't know if it's still that. But I actually used to live on that street there on Bank Street with like 4 other guys. It was like some of my favorite memories. But Kettleman's was a must. Downtown, like in the Byward Market, La Bottega. I'm a little biased. I used to work there as a cutting deli meat in my summers when I would stay in Ottawa in between university and college. And that best sandwiches there. And then as far as like bars and stuff, I don't know if they still exist, but like Minglewoods was like a big spot back in the day. Ottawa was like great. Like I actually I don't go back there nearly enough because there's really no reason to, but it's a cool little city. I don't think I could live there full time because the weather's too cold, but it's a great little city if you haven't been.
Yeah, you and I share the same belief about Ontario winters, especially up in that end. All of my family is from Cornwall, so I've spent many a times in those very cold areas. You mentioned knowing that you wanted to do television broadcasting.
Mhm.
When did that take root? Who were the people early on that you were like, that's the guy I want to be when I grow up?
Don Taylor. You know who Don Taylor is.
I know
a lot of
Don
people
Taylor is.
watching this who don't know who Don Taylor is. Sports Page. That was back in the day. That was the show. So for people who don't know, we used to have the show called Sports Page that aired back here in Vancouver. It used to be on UTV. That's how old the show is. It doesn't even exist anymore. But they used to spend rather than a typical sports show where they would, break things up into you'd have like a 2-minute highlight pack and this 2-minute highlight pack and that. They'd spend like 10 minutes on Canucks highlights, and then go to everything else. And it was very local based, which I loved. I thought that was so cool. And Don, if you've ever watched him, he used to be on Sportsnet. Now is a show locally here on Czech TV, but he has a very unique style. He made sports really fun. Jay Onrant, who, famous broadcaster here in Canada, he credits a lot of his style to Don Taylor. I don't know if a lot of people know that. And Don was always someone I really enjoyed from the sports side of things. As far as outside of sports, Bill Maher has always been a huge influence of mine. I really love the way he's been able to blend humor and, politics together. And it's something as well. I wouldn't really say I'm like Bill Maher a lot, but I've always watched his show, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. He's always, I just really enjoy his style. So those were two really big ones. And, honestly, when I was in high school, I initially wanted to get into computers or something. I've always been fascinated with tech, and I took a bunch of science courses in grade 11 and I failed miserably in all of them. I did quite bad, actually. So I was kind of okay, science, probably not my thing. I was never good in math either. So I kind of, again, took a turn more to the English and history, and I did quite well in those. And so I kind of just knew then, I had a friend of mine who was going to go to BCIT, and I'm yeah, why don't I just get into broadcasting? So, cause I always loved hockey. I played sports growing up. I played rugby, hockey in high school, did cross country running, did ultimate Frisbee as well in high school, a bunch of different sports, soccer. And so from there, it was just how can I turn this love of sports into something where, I can actually make a living out of it. And that was always the dream, was to be on camera. And I took a bit of a different, route than most. Most would, work somewhere, work their way up and get on camera. I sort of took a shortcut a little bit and ended up doing it more in the digital space. So yeah, it's kind of a weird journey.
Yeah, let's get into sort of the different route, because for a long time you worked, your day-to-day job was behind the scenes, was in control rooms, was editing stuff, doing that kind of thing. That was the internship, and eventually full-time gigs at a bunch of different places that I know as a Canadian that we won't necessarily run through for audiences that are I have no idea what City TV is and what all of this different stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
But then you were doing this on the side, and you were doing parting shots and all the different stuff that you started to do. How did you manage that split? How did you realize initially, okay, I need to maintain this split, because it's a hard thing. It's really difficult for anybody that's in the early days of this or thinking about it, from two people that have done I have a full-time job and I am doing this passion thing as a part-time job. First and foremost, understand it is very difficult, and it takes planning and balance and supportive patient partners. How did you navigate those roads?
Well, first, I just want to mention, because you just brought up a memory here. I got to give you credit, man. I don't think I've mentioned this publicly, but I remember it was the Demetrius Johnson and Ali Bagatinov card. And remember, we were kind of hanging out that week, and Pat Slowinski, our mutual buddy, who actually just saw Pat last summer when I was in Victoria, but that's another story. But no, I remember hanging out with you, and I think it was only my second UFC event that I covered. The first event that I covered was the Jones and Gustafson card, because at the time I was working for TSN in my day job, doing some stuff on the side for them, just on the website. This was before they had the TV rights. So I think that was the second card I covered. First card I covered for Sportsnet, because I was my day job was for Rogers, I think, at the time. But I just remember kind of following you around, and remember they had the media day at the EA Sports Center. Do you remember this? And they were doing the demonstration.
Yes.
And I'll never forget this moment. I remember Tyron Woodley was on that card. He fought Rory McDonald, and I remember Tyron said something to you, and you were kind of walking around. He's oh, I owe you a T-shirt or something. And I remember you'd interviewed him, and I remember thinking at the time back then when I was watching, it's that's the type of rapport that I want with fighters, where it's they know you, they recognize recognize you. And sure enough, like as the interviews came along, you sort of build up that rapport. But I wanted to thank you because I remember back then you definitely gave me the time of day, and we're kind of showing me the ropes a little bit, even though I'd done an event before. I definitely remember learning a lot from you that week because I feel like there wasn't a ton of media at that event for whatever reason. Maybe not the sexiest.
It was a summer show in Vancouver, and
yeah,
people don't want to be out. People don't want to be indoors when we finally get a nice summer day in Vancouver. We want to be doing stuff.
Yeah,
but yeah. I certainly remember going to EA Sports, hosted by James Cebulski.
That's right. James Cebulski, people don't know, kind of my neighbor, just lives down the hill from me here. I don't know if you know that in Tawasin.
There you go.
Not that I want to give away his address, but yeah. So to answer your question, like, how did I do it? So I have an awesome wife who's my girlfriend at the time. I basically told her, like, this is something. So I'll back up a little bit. The audio podcast I had, The Parting Shot with Adam Martin and I, which I believe you were on the show back in the day. Yep. We got it moved over to MMA Oddsbreaker with Nick Kalikas, and most of you know Nick. He hosts UFC on the Line and all that other great stuff. And Nick gave us a shot, and he's like, "Look, we'll pay you to do the show." And it was like, I remember this was like the first time I'd gotten any sort of paid work outside of when I worked at Fight Network for doing MMA content. And I was like, "Oh, this is cool." And the show went well. And then I started asking Nick, like, "Hey, is there any other opportunities here where I could make some money?" And so I was starting to do a bit of writing for them. And then at the time, Frank Trigg was doing like UFC interviews, like remotely. And I was like, I kind of want to do this. And I'm like, "Hey, Nick, would it be okay if I just did some interviews? Like, I don't want to step on Frank's toes at all, but I'd be interested in interviewing maybe some regional fighters or whatever." He's like, "Yeah, sure." So credit to Nick Kalikas, because if it wasn't for him, I don't know if I would have made the push I did. So I started, obviously Adam and I did the podcast, but I started doing more video interviews. And my mentality back then was always, I'm not going to turn down an interview. I don't care who it is, because, it's just, I need the practice. So I was interviewing as many people as I could, and Nick was paying me. That was the nice thing. Like, it's very hard to find paid work in this industry. So from that, I sort of built up my profile, ended up getting hired at Flow Combat back when they were a thing, and ended up working for them as well. So fast forward to like 2017, I become a dad, and my wife's like, "Look, you can't do both of these things, like, because you have to, be a dad when you get off work." Because I was basically scheduling it where I would, work my day job, and then from like, I remember like 6 till 9, like I think 2 or 3 times a week, I would do interviews. But obviously with being a dad, you can't do that. Not to mention my office, which I was working in, got turned into Landon's nursery, basically. So some of my older interviews were in my room because I didn't have any space in my little tiny condo in Toronto. But anyways, it came up to the point where I was like, I don't think I can give this up, because things were going well. I felt like I was getting a lot of traction. And the day job I had was great. I worked for Rogers on their digital team, and great benefits. And I mean, you name it, I had everything I needed with that job. But I was like, I'm not really passionate about it. And so I kind of added up my finances, and I'm like, look, like, I could probably get close to what I was making in my day job if I could just get on with a few more outlets. So I strategically, and this is a key word here, because a lot of people think, "Oh, I'm going to quit my job and it'll all work out." Like, no, I was very strategic about getting in. So I think at the time, I was working for, like I said, Oddsbreaker, Flow Combat. Fansided came into the picture. Mike Dice used to work there. Yep. Mike. He offered me a job as well. Fightful, ended up working for them. Sean Ross Sapp, Jimmy Van, all them. And then who else? I think there was a couple other outlets, but those were like the main ones. And it was like, look, this is close enough to like a full-time salary. So I took the plunge, gave Rogers my 2 weeks notice. And October 2017, I quit my job, and I've been here ever since, full-time. It's been awesome.
So I want to backtrack, because I feel like I did a poor job of saying thank you.
I talked a lot, though, to be fair.
For the lovely compliment. I don't want people to be like, "Oh, this guy doesn't even acknowledge that James said something nice about him." I do appreciate it. It is a thing that I have tried to build for myself from the get-go, is those relationships to where you can have those conversations where it isn't, here's the mic in front of you. It's just, the reason this show is called A Conversation With is because I want these to always just be conversations. I also feel very, very proud and appreciative of you acknowledging that, because paying it forward is the only way anybody gets ahead. It's how I got to where I am. And so my mindset is always, you mentioned Patrick Shviklinski, he's in that group as well, of like, look, whatever I can do to facilitate, to help, you still do it now. I still do it now. If anybody ever has questions, insights, anything, our DMs are open, and I'm sure we answer multiple, "Hey, how do I get to X?" a time throughout the month. So thank you for that. It does mean a lot.
No, and just to interrupt you there quickly, being a bad guest, I think that's so important that you give back as much as you can. That's one thing. Like people ask me about fight picks and stuff. It's like, hey, I do a Q&A every week. You can just ask it there. But anything media related, I'm more than happy to answer because I don't think there's a lot of resources out there, if we're being honest, in terms of like how to get into this, because it's kind of the Wild West. You know this. Like, there's not everyone has come from a journalism background that covers the sport, so it's kind of like a free for all. Like, what should you do? What are the policies? I come from like you and I both come from like a journalism background, so we kind of have that sort of that template of like how to get into stuff. Well, a little bit. Didn't you go to school? I thought you went to school for
no.
I have a
okay,
well, then I'm even more impressed then.
I have a psychology degree that is collecting dust somewhere.
Okay.
Actually, I think I got it from my mother as a birthday present a couple of years ago, so it's underneath me here in this office. But
all right, then forget Spencer, but the rest of us, no, I'm kidding.
It's me.
Yeah. But no, in general, like I think like I sort of come from that old school mentality of like, try and be professional, like, research your guests, like all that stuff. And I feel like a lot of people that are entering this space don't understand that. And I see a lot of mistakes made. And it's stuff that like I don't really care about, but I could see other people getting upset about. So I always offer like as much advice as I can and just try and help out. And that's one thing, like if anyone's watching this, if you ever have any questions, like I'm more than happy to answer it. Cause like A, I like talking about the industry, and B, like I think there's just so much we can all give back. And I love that you're like that too, because I think there's a lot of us who are willing to help. You just need to hit us up, right? So.
Yeah, it's important. The only way, and look, it's certainly there are moments where things are territorial, where people are worried about their own position and not getting overtaken by somebody else. But one of the best lines I ever heard is any good mentor wants their protege, their student, however you want to frame it, to exceed them at some point. And truthfully, for me, it's the same thing. Like if I can help somebody and they go on to succeed, that looks good for me because I helped that person get to where they are. And so that's what it's about for me. I know it is the same for you. You mentioned doing the math and sitting down and being like, okay, if I can just add a couple more outlets to this puzzle. I did it at the start of my career where it was, I'm going to write as many places as I can. I used to remember anytime I would jump on a show with somebody or somebody would introduce me somewhere, they'd be like, he works at 97 outlets. You can find him on the internet because he's all over it. You are the same. How do you balance that? How do you decide? How do you go through and figure out this is going here, that's going there, and almost prioritize? Is there a way to prioritize who gets what, which one gets the most of your focus or less of your focus? And how do you just juggle them all? Because I think these are things that young aspiring content producers, I was going to say writers, but it's not just writers anymore. It's content producers.
Yeah.
Can understand, because it's part of the gig and it's difficult, and any insights we can provide, I think we want to provide.
So with me, a Google Calendar is your friend. There's two things that I use very frequently. One is Google Calendar, and it's on my, my wife has access to my calendar. Like it's sort of like a catalyst of like, how am I going to plan out my day and sort of fill those holes? Basically what I do when I do my interviews is I let the fighters know like, hey, I'm available from this time to this time. Generally, like I might have something booked already, but let's see what's good for you. And then we'll sort of work around the times that I can facilitate. So that's the first thing is Google Calendar. The second thing is there's a website called Time Zone Converter, which is another godsend because sometimes I'm interviewing fighters all over the world and I need to know what time it is. And I have to kind of weigh my options. Like, okay, is it what would be best like for me to do this interview? Cause I got 2 kids. It's tough to like, plan it. And I've done it. Like I've had times where I've had to get up at like 5 a.m. to do an interview. I think actually Shavkat Rakhmonov, when I interviewed him before his last fight, I had to get up at like 5 a.m. on a Sunday, which is fine. Like I'm up that early anyways, but like stuff like that helps. But in terms of like allocating the interviews to specific outlets. So every outlet's different in terms of our agreement. So there's some outlets where they pay me like top dollar and they get my best interviews. So these are like, UFC champions, UFC headliners, big names in the sport, so to speak. So they get my top tier interviews, and those I generally do less of because it's much obviously harder to get those bigger names all the time than it is to get some of the other ones. And then I have other outlets where they just want UFC interviews. It doesn't matter. Now they'll pay me less, but it's much easier to book those fighters, like, your prelim fighters, your, whatever. And so that's sort of how I do it. And then the thing is, and I always tell the outlets this, I say, look, like okay, if I get like a big interview for one outlet, I try and spread it out. So let's say I get like Valentina, Shevchenko, who I got for one outlet this month, maybe I give Cyril Gahn to like someone else. Like, so I try and be fair that way. Certainly I have some outlets being like, how come we didn't get this interview? It's like, well, look, I'm trying to balance it the best way I can, but I think they all understand that, like, I try and be as fair as I can when it comes to allocating the interviews. And, I like I said, production's always a big thing with me, trying to make sure the interview looks good. I always get my interviews up right away. That's one thing I don't understand with a lot of newer people in this industry is like, they'll wait like a week to post something. It's like my mentality coming from the television world is like, you want to get stuff up as soon as possible. It doesn't matter when, it's out, just because the longer it's up, the longer it has its shelf life. And then, I promote it on social media. If it's like a really big interview, I'll also go that extra step and do that, clip on social media where you grab maybe a good soundbite, you have to transcribe it, you have to put the words on the little graphic and all that. You put that on all your social platforms, so Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and so yeah, like I have to basically allocate like kind of my time that way. And then on top of that, like I produce the Gambler's Perspective on UFC Fight Pass with Nick and Gianni. So that I have to do every Wednesday at that specific time. So that can be a bit problematic because let's say I have an interview, let's say I have an interview that's like right after or before, like I have to get to those too. And then another job that I have that I don't know if a lot of people know, I do video editing for Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Been doing that since September, and basically like I edit some videos for them. And then I just started producing one of their podcasts every Thursday. So that's another thing where there's like some stuff that I have to be like at a specific time for. But the nice thing about what I do for the most part is I kind of make my own schedule. So I can kind of do stuff at my own leisure. And my mentality is, get as much work as I can done earlier in the week. So like Monday to Thursday is kind of how I do my schedule. And then I always take Fridays off from interviews because that's a day where I can focus on my YouTube channel, which has kind of become like my side gig now because of all my interviews. So yeah, I think I answered that question.
Yeah, that's a very detailed answer. And oddly enough, I'm going to go to walk me through a typical day. So like a day like today, we are recording this on Monday, March 20th. Mm-hmm. What is your day today look like? When does it start? And what's the rest of the day progress to?
Okay. I usually wake up before my alarm goes off. So I was up at 4:50 this morning. I got up. I don't know if to give you a total play by play, but basically get up, I stretch because like I'm getting old and I need to stretch every morning because I sit too much. And then I go to the gym and I go for like half hour to 45 minutes. Trevor Linden Fitness, shout out to them. I go to them usually 5 days a week, come home. So this morning, I noticed that Colby got an interview with Submission Radio. So I immediately texted Colby this morning and said, hey, what's up? Can we do something? And didn't hear anything, went to the gym, worked out, came back. Colby texted me as I'm eating breakfast saying, hey, we can do it at noon Eastern, which is 9 our time. So I'm like, okay, I got to balance this out because I got to do my preview show that I do for my YouTube channel every Monday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So I did that. Immediately after that, did the Colby interview. Immediately after that, did a preview of Maverick MMA, which is like a local promotion. The promoter came on, wanted to do like a preview of it. So I did that. Supposed to interview Ed Herman before this. He didn't show up. Still waiting to hear from Ed. Just talked to him this morning. And then I hopped on here. And then the rest of my day is basically just getting the rest of my content up. I have a few more interviews. And then I might have some NFL stuff for Matthew Berry. But yeah, I'm kind of playing it by ear. This week's a little bit better because both my kids are in daycare this week because it's March break. So I actually don't have to pick them up till 4:30 instead of 2:30. So that gives me a bit of extra time to do some work. So that is my very mediocre day that I have here.
So do you have a set end time? Like do yourself and your wife have a like, okay, you're done work at X o'clock, unless there's something pressing and very important so that you can be husband and dad?
Yeah, usually it's 2:30 is like my cutoff time because that's when I go pick up my son, my oldest, who's 5 now, and like usually he has
5 now.
I know, it's crazy. Where's the time go? Yeah.
Oh my God.
So I so usually I have to pick him up at 2:30, and it's funny. Like I tell this people all the time, like people don't know what I do. Like when I go to school, because I don't want to be one of these guys. Like I cover the UFC. Like it's just I like kind of separating the two. So I go to school. Nobody knows what I do. I'm just like regular James dad. I'm picking up my kid. I'm talking to the parents, and then I take my kid to jiu-jitsu. And even at his jiu-jitsu, he goes to the jiu-jitsu in Ladner at the Gracie gym there. It's really really awesome. It's by Dunbar Lumber. You mentioned Sobolski. He does the ads for Dunbar Lumber on the radio. But yeah, so I usually take him to jiu-jitsu after after school. So it's like basically pick them up, go straight to jujitsu. And then we come home, we eat dinner. After dinner, I do their baths. And then I get like a little bit of a window at night where I can either watch TV or if I have work, I can do it. And then I'm in bed by 9. I'm really boring because I get up so early. So that's like a typical day. But yeah, you're right. Like usually if it's like a big interview and I need to get it up right away, my wife will kind of like be like, hey, can you help out with dinner or help out with bath? But in most cases, I try and stop doing work around 2:30 on most days, just because I got to pick up my kid and then take him to jujitsu, and he goes a couple days a week. So,
okay. So before we get off of this, one more question.
Yeah, anything.
The early morning thing is a point of contention between myself and my takeaways partner, Harry Powell, who hates mornings, who thinks I'm a lunatic for getting up in the morning. He will see me act online. He will see me do something online and send me a WhatsApp and be like, we're up early today. So like this morning, I was awake at probably like 5:15, which is about 5:15, 5:30 is about regular for me. I operate better in the morning.
Same here.
I am getting old. I like my evenings to be pretty mellow and pretty laid back. I don't want to be doing the burn the midnight oil. Is that what it is for you, or is it
100%? Yeah, I'm glad I don't meet many people
with life better.
Spencer, you're opening my whole life up here because a lot of the people I meet, it's the opposite. It's like I can work at night. I can't. I'm dead tired. Like I don't like doing any work at night. If I don't have to, I will avoid. I would rather get up earlier in the morning. I'd rather get up at 4 a.m. and do work than stay up till 10 and do work. Like that's how I operate, and that's also why I work out in the morning because there's no way I'd have energy to work out later. Plus, it's busy at the gym. You know what it is when I lived in Toronto, I used to have to get up early anyways to go to work because a lot of people don't know this. Like when I worked at TSN and I worked at Discovery Channel, those are actually in Scarborough. They're not in Toronto. So to get there, and I didn't have a car, I used to have to take the subway. So that would take you like 40 minutes to an hour to get there. So if I started work at 8, I'd have to leave my place at like, earlier, like around 7. And then I still want to get a workout in because I won't have time at night. So yeah, I've been a morning person for like more than a decade. It's just in my blood basically. And I prefer it that way. Yeah.
I was a night owl for a long, long time. It was the way I went. I worked in bars and restaurants for a number of years, which meant you're closing. I always worked afternoons and closing, which means you're getting home at 1, 2, whatever. I worked in casinos where you're getting home at 3, 4 in the morning. And so evenings were my thing for a long time. But as soon as I settled into this is what I'm doing, it became, no, evenings are dumb. Staying up late is dumb. My wife goes to bed. My dogs, various at different points, go to sleep. I don't want to be disturbing anybody. Why don't I get up early, get stuff done while the house is quiet, while the world is quiet? We're out here on the West Coast. We're 3 hours behind everybody on the East Coast and greater. Let's get up and capitalize. So there you go, Harry. I'm not the only crazy that gets up at early hours. James is with me.
Yeah, 100%. I preach that all day.
All right. So we'll get into some non-MMA stuff here.
Excellent.
You, sir, have a cat who is famous on your Twitter and Instagram. The great Fuji.
Yes.
You are cat over dog. And I need the explanation because I am
grew up with I know. And
I am dog all the way.
Yes. And I know, what was the name of your dog? I hate to bring it up, that passed away. I remember you're really close to it. What was his name again?
So we had Luke, who passed away 2.5 years ago. And then Skippy passed away a year and a bit ago. And now Biggie is kicking around here somewhere. I don't hear any
pugs.
noise.
I know that, right? They're pug dogs.
We had a pug. Then we had my mother-in-law's old dog. Skippy was a mix of a bunch of stuff. And now we've got a 75-pound pit bull.
Okay, so my cat story, maybe mediocre, maybe not. I'll let you judge after. So I grew up with a cat. When I was like growing up, I had a Siamese cat. So my mom always had cats. She had a cat growing up, and then I had a cat growing up. And then I didn't have a pet forever. Like when I lived in Toronto, I just never had a pet because it was probably partying too much or whatever. I couldn't take care of one. So and then fast forward to my wife and I getting married in 2015. We're like, yeah, let's get a cat. This is like, next step before having kids, I guess. So my wife wanted to get the specific cat, and they're extremely rare. They're British short hair seal point cats. So if you look at my cat, you think he's Siamese, but he's not. He's a British short hair, but has the seal point coloring. So we ended up getting this cat from the UK. And it was like this whole process. We had to go through like all this different paperwork and all this different stuff. And I was like, whatever, like my wife wants it. Like, you know, then everyone's happy. So we ended up getting this cat, and then we put an ad on Kijiji as well. And they're like, hey, is anyone interested in getting this cat? Cause we can get another cat too. And we can save on the shipping. Cause they had to ship the cat out basically through a plane or whatever.
Right.
So we found another couple. They met us up with us at Pearson, and we went to like the loading dock, and they bring these two little kittens out, and we actually picked up the wrong cat at first. Ours had like paint on his nails. So we picked him up. We named him Fuji. No specific reason. I think my wife's half Chinese, so we thought of some sort of Asian name. So we went with Fuji, and he lived with us in the condo for a couple of years. And then when we moved here, he came on the plane with us. So Fuji's been on 2 planes. I think that's pretty rare for a cat, I would say. So.
And so what is it for? Cause like, what is it for you about cats?
Well, just
over dogs.
Over dogs.
Is it the ease? Because like we're looking at this 75-pound Goliath. Yeah. That is a pit bull that lots of people just see him and they're like, not interested. And now we're doing the like, man, how are we going to get away for a week? How are we going to go somewhere?
Okay, so that was part of it.
So cats are easier. The food goes out, they go themselves, and they don't care.
Well, that was the big thing too, was when the reason we got a cat. Well, first off, we were in a condo, and having a dog, I think having a dog in a condo is just cruel, because you can't like, unless you're really able to take the dog out a lot, it's just not a good space for it. So that was a bit easier. And also after my wife and I got married in 2015, we're like, we want to travel as much as we can. Like we have money to do it. Let's go do it. So that whole 2016, we were traveling basically every like chance we could get, every long weekend, every like vacation time that we had, we would put it towards that. So we actually had like someone and like, you know, feed the cat when we were gone. But you're right, it's much easier. But I like dogs. I would love to get a dog. I just like right now, I just don't have, like, I'm not anti-dog. I know a lot of dog people are anti-cat, and I understand the reasonings why, but it's just easy to maintain. And I think when my kids are older, I probably will get a dog. Although my wife's like, no, I don't want the hassle. But it's more of a responsibility thing, because I got 2 kids now. That's enough. Along with the cat, it's way too much work. So.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Anybody that follows your Twitter or your Instagram knows that you golf.
Yes.
It's on your Twitter bio, mediocre golfer.
Absolutely.
How mediocre are we talking? What kind of golfer are you?
If I break under 100, we're good. So I'll tell you the golf story quick. I used to work when I was younger. I used to work at Beach Grove Golf Course, which is here in Tsawwassen, where I live, and it's a private golf course. And it was one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. Like, my job was to set up for events, change the towels in the change room, but literally most of my job was sitting in the laundry room listening to Team 1040 back in the day, which is now a comedy station, which is unfortunate. That's a whole. Actually, you were on there a bunch of times. I remember Sakaris had you on a number of times on the old station. But shout
out to Matt.
Shout out to Matt Sakaris. Yes, who's a great guy. Also, fellow Carleton grad as well too. So yeah, that was like I've always liked golf. My dad used to play. I played a little bit when I was younger, but not much. And then COVID hit in 2019, and I had nothing to do. The gyms were closed. Right. But the one thing that you could do was go golfing, because it was outside and it was socially distanced. So my father-in-law, or I should say my mom's fiance, he was like big into golf, and he used to go with his like buddies every Wednesday. So so he invited me out one time, and we went out, and I played awful, but I was like, you know what, like, this is kind of fun. And so ended up getting a set of clubs, and I was playing like every Wednesday, and now I play all the time, and I actually play once a month with a mutual friend of ours, Jeremy Brand of MMA Sucka. We actually are playing this Sunday. And so there's a group of us that play every once a month, every Sunday. And then there's a group of us that play usually every Wednesday when the weather gets nicer. So not a great golfer, but I love it. Like, I think if you are older and you have the time to do it, I think golf is a great way to relieve stress, get exercise, just get outside, get that vitamin D. I can't say enough good things about golf. I'm totally hooked now. It's amazing.
What's the best part of your game?
Probably my driving. Yeah. Like, I don't hit it super far, but I find that I can hit it very accurately in terms of where I want to get it down the fairway. My worst part by far is my putting. My putting needs serious work.
You knew this is an experienced host knows where the host is going with the question and just comes right away with the you asked best. I know worst is coming next. Favorite course around here? Obviously, you and I live about an hour apart from each other. I've played a few courses around here. Haven't quite gotten out to your neck of the woods, but what's your favorite course in the sort of lower mainland area?
Speaking of, I just got to mention this quickly. One of these days we will link up. If I go to
Yes.
Castle Fun Park with my kid, I think that's a good option because you're out in Abbotsford. Or if I go to an Abbey Canucks game, I just haven't done neither of those things yet, but
Okay.
it's on the list. But
Yes.
favorite course, you know what? I really like. So if we're talking around here, I don't know if this counts, but Whistler's still my favorite course. Up there, just the regular Whistler Golf Club. There's the Nicholas North one as well, but Whistler's just the scenery there is amazing. The hole on 16, you're literally looking like you're up on top. You're looking down at the water. It's one of the best courses I've ever played. That's probably up there. But if we're going to go lower mainland only, is it north? I always get it mixed up. It's the Canucks course, the one that they're like, the main course is, I think it's Northview. It's not, yeah, it's Northview, I think, not Northlands. Northlands is the one that Sakaris and them always play at. But yeah, Northview out there is really good. But a close second I'll mention, I love Tawasin. Like I play there all the time. It's a little pricey, but it's a really big course. They got a great restaurant there, Pat Quinn's. That's always like a good go-to as well. But if I have to pick one, I'll go, I think it's Northview, the one in Surrey, Cloverdale area. That's there's two courses, but it's the one that's by the water. I forget what it's called exactly, but that course is awesome. I really like that one.
All right. Keep this in mind. Myself, my brother-in-law, and one of his close friends, my realtor, we try to play as often as we can once things get organized, and we're always looking at the like, okay, we want to play some different places instead of just going to the same place. If we're going to do this, if we're going to make a point of it, let's get to some spots. So I appreciate the recommendations.
Anytime, man. And that goes in general. If there's any other courses, like I'm trying to play as many as I can around here. I can tell you the good ones and the bad ones. We're actually playing Fraser View on Sunday. That's a pretty good course too.
Yeah. I've been out to Fraser View a couple of times.
Yeah.
We'll circle it back to some MMA stuff, but we'll keep it pretty light, pretty straightforward here. Don't have to name names.
Yep.
Best interview, favorite interview you've ever done.
George St. Pierre, interviewed him about a year ago. I mean, that's like just to get to interview him one-on-one is so like rare and tough to do. I got it through a sponsor. People always wonder how I get certain interviews. That was just like, it fell in my lap. Sponsor knew one of the site owners I was working for, got the interview set up. So George has got to be up there. Another one that's not necessarily MMA related. I guess it kind of could be. I interviewed Goldberg a couple of years ago. That was cool. Like, remember he did the Elite XC broadcasting as well. So that was up there. Those are two that really stand out. If you want to say like most challenging interview, because I don't know if you're going there, I had to interview Charles Felony Bennett one time, and he was just like unhinged the entire interview. It's on my channel if you want to watch it. It's just like all types of stuff. But like partway through the interview, he starts talking about he was like beating up women, and I'm just like, okay, we got to change the subject here. Like it was just a crazy interview, and it was one of those ones where I had a list of questions and I maybe got like 2 in, and it was just him sort of rambling on. So that was probably the most challenging.
Okay, so let's mine a couple of those things. You mentioned people always wonder how you get interviews. I get the question all the time. How do you set this stuff up? I'm fortunate. I've been doing this for 12, 13 years now. I have a lovely Rolodex of names. I also have very good relationships with a bunch of managers and agents and press people. What's the process for you? How often are you reaching out directly? How often are you going through agents and managers and things like that? How often is it somebody approaching you?
I'm glad you bring this up because this is one of my pet peeves in the industry is there's a lot of people who get really good interviews and I feel like they're just given to them through the UFC. And I don't think a lot of people realize that because there is a process when it comes to booking interviews, and it's much harder to do it the way that we're doing it, which is going through management, whatever. So it really depends on the fighter. Like with certain fighters, like usually the bigger names, you got to go through the management. And I don't mind that. I have good relationships with all but one management group. We can talk about that if you want, but it's we don't have to. I think we know which one it is anyways. But yeah, it's they're all pretty straightforward. Like I'll usually try and do the interview a couple weeks in advance. That's a rookie mistake a lot of people make, is trying to do the interview during fight week. That's just a bad idea. They're cutting weight. There's all types of stuff. So I usually, like if it's a big name fighter, I try and get it about a month out. So I usually go through the management that way. Now, certain fighters I know like pretty well. Here's a quick example. Colby, like I go through him directly. He doesn't have a manager. I've known Colby for years. We've always had good rapport. So he was someone where I can just text and get the interview. Curtis Blade, same thing. I'm going to be interviewing him later this week. Curtis and I go all the way back to when he made his debut for RFA, and we've always kept in touch, and that's good. And then there's other ones, like I said, you go through the management. I work with a lot of management groups where sometimes they'll pitch me interviews to, names that aren't as big, and they'll be like, hey, are they available? And usually I'm like, yeah, I'll take whoever. And then other times it's going to them directly, and it's usually Instagram. That's usually where most of the fighters are active. I'll send a quick message. Like yesterday, that's my process, just so people know. Usually Friday, I'll go through, I give myself about an hour and I go through all the upcoming cards and I go, who can I interview on this card? Because I have to do a lot of interviews every month. And so I look at like, who do I have access to? Who speaks English? Like all this different stuff. If they don't speak English, can I get access to a translator? Like I go through all these different things. So I went through like a bunch of the cards. I sent out I don't know how many messages, and it's just this. It's more of like who gets back to you type thing. So if I don't hear from a fighter or two in a couple of days, I'll maybe send that follow up message on like the Sunday, and then if I don't hear anything there, I move on and I try and find someone else. So in a lot of cases, like even today, I had a couple of people get back to me today, and I messaged them on Friday. So sometimes that happens where it's a manager or a fighter. It takes them a little bit to get back to you and get that interview. But it's all about. And here's one thing I'll mention as well, and I think this is important. Like I don't ever really get asked like what outlet I'm doing it for. A lot of times it's just like, hey, we know you're doing the interview. And I think that speaks to, not trying to sound conceited here, but it speaks to the brand that I built. Like they know they're going to do an interview with me. There's no curveballs. There's no like me trying to, say something out of context or try and make a fighter look bad. I think you can still ask tough questions, but do it in a way that's still professional. And so I think in a lot of cases, like the brand that I built has allowed me to get these interviews where I think in other cases for some people, it's like, oh, I work for such and such outlet. That's how I'm going to get the interview, So I don't have that luxury. Like some people, like I know for a fact the UFC just says, hey, we have these fighters available. Who do you want to talk to? And they get them. And it's, I'm not being a hater, but I'm just saying there is a difference between those of us who have to build those relationships as opposed to those who just sort of get emailed interview requests.
How many interviews are you doing per month? Average. Give me ballpark.
Probably around, it was higher before. I'd say, you know what, I can, let me
You've got the calendar up in front of you.
No, I have I don't even have to do that. I have an actual, like I have all my contracts kind of laid out here. So I kind of know, let me just find this here for a second. As we're doing this in real time. If I had to guess though, as I'm kind of just saying this on the fly, if I had to guess, it's probably close to like 50 a month. It's at least like, I remember that number was higher, but it just depends on the week. Like I was away last week on vacation and, so obviously I'm kind of playing catch up this week. Okay. So here I got the actual list here. So I've got what, 4, it's about anywhere from 30 to 40 a month around there. I'd say is how many I do. So
I gotcha. And for you, when you're getting these mapped out, you mentioned how you look ahead. I do the same thing for all of my stuff. My UFC work, it gets sent to me either here are the people or pick from this list.
Yeah.
That's how that gets set up. I do the same thing as you for the other stuff. Started doing a few more interviews here on Severe where I just go through and do the like, who do I know? Who can I connect with? Let's do it that way. In terms of prepping the interview itself, in terms of figuring out what you're going to ask, what you're going to talk about, things of that nature, what's your process for crafting that question set with Charles Bennett that you didn't get to at all?
Well, I always look, it depends. Again, it also depends on the fighter, but like for someone like Charles, like I would look at like, okay, first thing I do, obviously look at their Tapology record, see like when have they fought last? How active have they been? All these different things. I'll look at, are they in a winning streak, losing streak? And then I'll go to like literally on Google News, I'll just type in their name. Has there been any news about them recently? Is there any other topics besides fighting we can get into? And then I always go to the social media page, always go to Instagram. Sometimes they're posting like they're doing like a cool workout, or maybe they're watching something interesting on TV. I try and get as much as I can, but how I like doing my questions is I put it in bullet points. I don't actually write out the question. I'll kind of put like, hey, talk about this, whatever. Prime example this morning, interviewing Colby, he just did Submission Radio last night. So I'm literally eating breakfast this morning, trying to get my kids ready, trying to watch his Colby interview and trying to make sure I'm not covering the same stuff. So like in my interview, I asked him other stuff that was not asked in that interview. That can be a little bit more difficult, but I think with most fighters, I have it, 10, 15 questions around there, leave a bit of wiggle room. Always make sure you listen to your guests. Cause sometimes you can, if they mention something interesting, like, oh, this is a new contract for me. Like, okay, well, let's build off that. Like, what does it mean to have your third contract in the UFC or something along those lines? But I always have as much information as you can. And here's the other thing. If you do run out of questions, start talking about stuff in the news. Like, what do you think of, how did you score Leon and Usman over the weekend? What did you think of John Jones beating Cyril Gane? Do you think he's the GOAT? Stuff like that. That's another way that you can kind of draw attention to your interviews while also just, getting the usual fight stuff out of the way as well.
One of the things that you've done periodically when you've had the opportunity, when you've been on the road, when you've been able to connect with guys that you have that rapport with, is sit down and play vintage video games and go through things. Where did it come from? When did you know that this is a thing that can be one of my things?
So I don't remember where. Okay, so UFC the Khabib and Iaquinta card. I had brought. So I actually went to that event with a couple of friends of mine that were also covering the card. Steve Jeffrey, I know you know
Yep.
Steve. So we went down to cover that event. I was still living in Toronto at the time, and I brought my system with me. I have like a little like Raspberry Pi system that has all the old retro games on it. And so when we were there, we're like, yeah, we'll play this like in between like me having to upload content or whatever. We'll just bring it and play it in the hotel room. And then like Calvin Cater was on that card. I fought Moicano. There was a few other fighters on there, and I'm just like, why don't we just like play video games and we'll like, you know, like record it with the fighters. That'll be something different. So I think I played with Cater, I think Rob Font, and Kyle Bochniak was on that card too. We played as well. And so I just turned it into a thing. And just to show you like how I didn't know what I was doing, like back then I would have two cameras. I'd have one where the camera was, you know, shot on us. It was like sitting on a table, it would like sit upright and you could see us playing. And then the other camera was actually filming the TV screen because I didn't know how to capture the actual like screen or whatever. Since then I've figured out, you know, capture cards and all that stuff, and the technology's got a little bit better. So I've been able to use that. Like the last event I was at, Julian Marquez and I played Tecmo Bowl. But you know what it is, man? Like I'm just a huge retro gaming fan. Like I have an arcade in my office. I have a couple systems. I have an old Sega Genesis upstairs. My son's, well, my oldest, he'll play a little bit too. But I just like them because they're simple. Like if you have a busy schedule like I do, right, I don't have time to like dig into these new games like Call of Duty and all this stuff because I just don't have the bandwidth or the time to like look through storylines and all this different, learn the controls. I can go play like an NHL 94 and I know A is shoot and B is pass, and that's good enough for me, and I can play for 20 minutes and it's all good. And it's the same thing with the fighters. Like a lot of them, you know, sometimes they've never played these games or whatever, but it's just very easy to learn as opposed to like picking up a UFC game and it's like, how do I do like an uppercut? You know, it's much different. So that's why it's like me combining these two loves that I have together.
People ask me what my favorite game is because I have a system and stuff like that. And I'm like, 2K. And they're like, oh, what do you? And I'm like, but listen, I do the general manager mode of things because same thing. I can't figure. When we got away from A is shoot, B is pass, C is go for a steal, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm not coordinated enough. I was never the guy with the fighting games that learned all the moves on Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. I got punch, kick, and jump, and that's it. That's all I got in me. Yeah.
And I listen again, and that's why those games still hold the test of time because they're so easy to play. Like now, like if I was to go play like some of these newer games, like it's too complicated. And I will mention, I do have a Nintendo Switch, but my kids mainly play it. And also they actually make a lot of the games that are kind of like old school games like we had. Like I don't know if people know this, like this blew my mind when we bought it for my son, but they have a Sonic Mania game that has it basically is the old Sonic, but just with new levels, like the 16-bit and the whole thing. And I'm like, this is my wheelhouse. I remember playing this when I was your age. So
I bought Sonic for my nephew who is getting into video games, was like specifically here, we can play it together. I'm not going to be good at it, but you'll figure it out. He comes over and literally the last time he was here, we were playing and he was like, I think I just want to play by myself because you're not very good.
Yeah,
you're really
I get that with my son. I won't
Uncle,
play
you're
Smash
really
Brothers
slowing me down, and I was like, "Oh, don't."
Yeah. No, I get it. I get my son can kick my ass in Super Smash Brothers. Like it's not even a question. So
we played once, and he just looked at me and was like, "We're gonna do something else, Uncle."
Yeah, when you're the one who's being told to leave,
I was like,
getting frustrated.
No, sure, good enough. Yeah. So, born and raised in Tawasin, the Vancouver area, lifelong Vancouver Canucks fan.
Yep.
It's got to feel difficult at times.
Oh, big time. Especially when like it's like you can see what's happening at the top and like everyone, like I follow the local scene here very much, way more so now that I've moved back and like I've been sort of immersed in it.
Right.
But it's just so frustrating because like all the fans want to rebuild. Like we've been screaming this for years that like, you know, what we have on ice is not what people want to see. And the owner is so hell-bent on getting in the playoffs that they're willing to re-sign JT Miller to a huge contract. Like, there's nothing wrong with JT Miller, the player. It's the contract that's not going to age well later on. And we did this already with Louis Eriksson, with so many other players. It's frustrating. Saying that though, like I still watch. I probably shouldn't because that's probably the only way the owner's gonna, you know, change his course. But like my kid is like obsessed. Landon, he's all about the Canucks. We got him an Elias Pettersson jersey for Christmas. He's been dying to go. I did buy tickets to a game, which I realized kind of like although they're winning lately, but we're going to the game on the 2nd because it's like a earlier game. It's at like 5:00, so it's a little bit easier to take him out there and do all that. So my whole thing with being a dad is I want to give my kid good experiences when he's growing up. Like I want him to remember things. I don't want to buy him toys that he's going to throw away. I want him to experience things. So I think this is one of those things where, tickets are expensive. They're not a great team right now, but for him, he'll always have that memory of going to a game, kind of like I did when I went at the Pacific Coliseum. And I remember going to Mike Pekka's first game when he was a Canuck. So that's just, stuff like that.
I feel bad having just like poked that bear a little bit, because I can see the vitriol. I can see the frustration of this region. As somebody that didn't grow up here and
Mhm.
then worked at the province and listened to the sports guys out here, it always was a like, oh, it's nice to not have to go through this. It's
Yeah.
nice to not feel this thing of we're close and then we're not doing it right. And then we're close again and then we're not doing it right. Have there been any points where you've been like, you know, it's time to just be done with these guys? Or
I
is
mean,
it
it's
ride or die?
no, but I'm ride or die, but there is a lot of frustration, like especially with what happened at the beginning of this. Well, when like, so here's a prime example. Rutherford and Alvin come in and I'm thinking, okay, they're saying all the right things. They're saying what everyone's been saying, like, hey, we gotta change the course here. And I really felt optimistic, with all the Stanley Cup winning experience, that this management group is going to be different and they're not going to make the same mistakes of Jim Benning, which is, try and trade picks for like these work in progress players like Lyndon Vay and all these Sven Barchi that they kept trading for. And then they go out and basically do that. And they're like, we need a retool instead of rebuild. It's like, no, like people want to rebuild. If you look at all the successful teams over the last couple of years, you look at Colorado, you look at Tampa Bay, they had those years of painful rebuilding. And they also had first round picks that were high up there. And, some of the picks have hit. Quinn Hughes, Pedersen, they've hit very well. Olio Levy didn't hit. Jake Virtanen didn't hit. They traded away Jared McCann. Like there's all these things that you need to have those players that are on those entry level deals because of the cap. The most valuable commodity in the NHL right now is salary cap space, and the Canucks are capped out and they don't even have a good team. So if you can only imagine like how far they have to go just to be a contender, let alone make the playoffs, because right now they're totally tied up right now with all these contracts, and they might buy OEL out in the summer. We'll see, but it's so frustrating because like a lot of us will still support this team, but there's no plan, it's frustrating.
Given all of this frustration, given the hardships, I mean, I was in Vancouver covering a UFC event a couple of days before the parade was planned that turned into a riot instead of a parade, which shows you the level of fan investment, which shows you how much this region just desperately wants success. I ask this of fighters that are going into championship fights all the time or big moments. What would it mean to see that Stanley Cup parade go through Vancouver and come out through Tawasin and be able to say and see your team hoist Lord Stanley above their head?
It would be, first off, great question. Second off, I mean, that's all you want as a sports fan. You want to see a championship. The closest thing we've had, if you want to talk about that, is the Seahawks winning, right? They're 3 hours away down the I-5. Like, that was awesome seeing that. But like, even then, like, Seattle, right? It's not Vancouver.
Right.
So it would be awesome. And I think honestly, like what it comes down to that I'm starting to realize now is like, this is something that I've been very careful with my kids, where I don't want to force them to do anything. Like I show them certain things, but my son really has taken a liking to hockey. We got him in ball hockey this month. He's going to start ice hockey in September, but I haven't like forced him to do it, but he like enjoys it. It's like a thing. And I guess for me, the thing that would be really cool is to be able to experience that with my sons, to see the Canucks win a Stanley Cup and have that memory and have that inserted, because it's been a lot of losing. One thing I do want to mention about that riot stuff that took place in 2011, a lot of people don't realize that part of that too was them being upset with the Olympics, right? Like there was never a vote on whether to do the Olympics or not. We've had Olympics in the past where they did it. They went to city council and they voted and they turned down the Olympics. Well, Vancouver, they just went ahead and did it, and they tore down all this infrastructure. And there were a lot of people who were upset with that. So while yes, there are Canucks fans who were morons and rioting and all that, we saw that in 94. I definitely remember that as a kid, but I think there's also another sector that just rioted for the sake of, we're pissed off at the government, all this different stuff. Cause I think a lot of them weren't Canucks fans. They were people just looking to cause chaos, but certainly doesn't help when you're losing.
Oh, for sure.
Canucks were. Yeah.
I also remember it because a few weeks earlier, as I said, the UFC was out here, and prior to the UFC's arrival, there was all of this. We need to get more policing, and there needs to be more police down at I think it was then GM Place, or still GM Place at the time. Yep. We need to have more people down at GM Place because the UFC's coming and these fans are going to be crazy. And there were zero issues.
Yeah. I remember bars around. Yeah.
And then a week later, when the Canucks lost in the Stanley Cup, the same thing that happened the last time they lost in the Stanley Cup happened again. And everybody was like, we couldn't have seen this coming. How could we possibly prepare?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Actually, you just brought up a memory of mine. I remember after that UFC event, because I think my dad ended up going to that show. I remember they had a rule at bars. Remember back when Affliction was a thing with the
Yep.
T-shirts and everything?
Couldn't
They
wear
would
'em.
not they would not allow people to wear Affliction or like fight-related shirts in certain
Yeah.
bars because they were worried about gang activity. It's crazy, huh?
Affliction, 5-star, the whole
Yep.
nine, the
Tap out.
bedazzled, all the bedazzled stuff that you
Yes,
couldn't wear,
exactly.
that you shouldn't have been wearing anyways.
It's an
It was a
$80 T-shirt. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I mean, I got a $55 shirt on right now. Shout outs to the folks at One Bone, but because I'm a big trying to get comfy dude.
Oh, that's my number one priority since working at home is to make myself as comfortable as possible. I got slippers on right now, Spencer. They're amazing. So.
Dude, there's a reason that this is
sweatpants
are on, and it'll be shorts all summer, always.
Yeah.
Letting people behind the camera. One thing I do want to touch on before I get you out of here, you have done a tremendous job building your YouTube, all of your social platforms. You just went through an experience very recently
where
that stuff was hacked. Talk me through it, walk me through it. What happened? I mean, it's got to be panic when you wake up and realize what the hell.
Wasn't even waking up. It was during the middle of the day. So what had happened was, I'll kind of give you the short version. Someone had DM'd me on Instagram saying they wanted to advertise on my YouTube channel. And that's something I get every now and then. I'll get like an email or something saying, hey, we want to do some advertising. We'll pay you like lump sum if you run an ad or you do an ad for us. So I didn't think anything of it. And they messaged me on Twitter. I looked at their Twitter history. It looked like a legit account. And so they emailed me. And in that email, they had an agreement that was a PDF. And I clicked on it and it didn't open up. And then I looked at the file extension. It was not a PDF. I'm like, oh crap. Like I'm in, like something's up here, right? Like this looks like something bad. So I immediately shut down my computer and I'm like, I don't know what I should do here right now. And then I rebooted my computer and I double checked like all the programs that were running. And I'm like, okay, it doesn't look like anything's running. So I thought, okay, looks like I dodged a bullet. Everything's good. And then I'm recording a video and I see my browser log me out. And I'm like, okay, like maybe whatever. Sometimes that happens with Google, it like kicks you out. So I go to like try and log in. My password doesn't work. Then I go to the recovery options and it gave me two options, a backup code, which I never made one, and a USB key that you had to insert physically in your computer, which I didn't have either. So the hacker I think what had happened was the hacker got into my passwords. They got into my Gmail. They changed my password. They locked me out. And then from there, they got a hold of my YouTube channel because my Gmail is attached to my YouTube channel and they were running Tesla ads and all this different stuff. So I'm freaking out. I then go to Twitter, let everyone know what's going on. I said, does anyone know anyone at Google or YouTube? Because like I'm dealing with a crisis here. I remember it happened at like 2 p.m. And then from there, I was like, okay, I'm going to change my email on my Twitter just in case this guy has access to that. Sure enough, they got in, changed the same thing on my Twitter as well. So I'm locked out of Twitter, Google, my Gmail, and YouTube. And yeah, I'm freaking out. Like I didn't get any sleep. It was a nightmare for like about a week or two. The Twitter actually didn't end up getting reinstated for about a month, but the YouTube and Google was tough. Luckily, I have a friend who works in cybersecurity. They were able to kind of like find out where this guy was hacking me from. They kind of like, I don't know, he did something, but it basically like spooked the guy off. So they stopped doing stuff. YouTube shut down my channel. I got that email. That was not very pleasant either. Your channel has been terminated. I'm like, oh, great. Like, 6 years of work or whatever it's been down the drain. But what I come to found out, and thankfully I was able to get a hold of someone through the ticketing system at Google, was that they were aware of what was going on because other channels were getting hacked. In fact, the UFC's channel was also having a similar hack. Their channel was taken over by a Tesla live stream as well. So long story short, it was very, very crazy. I had all the security measures. People are like, you needed 2FA on. I had 2FA. They still got past it. So I think the biggest thing I can recommend that and I even did a video on this is like, make sure you have more than enough access to multiple accounts. Like now my YouTube channel, I have multiple emails that have attachments to that account. So I can get access to it. Make sure you have very strong passwords. I did pretty much as well. Get a VPN if you can. I had one too. I just didn't happen to have it on that day. And just like really like be more stringent on the security because it was just insane. It was a nightmare. And I still had to do work on top of that. Like I had to do interviews while I'm still dealing with this and trying to like move everything over to the new email. And it was insanity. So thankfully that's over.
I was going to say, thankfully everything is back up and running. Everything has been restored. All the platforms, everywhere that people know to find you are still in place the same as they always were.
Yes. Yeah, it worked out. I was able to get access to the old email. I transferred everything over. My old email is kind of like, I still have it. I still have access to it, but everything's over to the new email, strong passwords, like you name it. I got 2FA on everything now, like just to make sure this never happens again. And actually should mention when I was on vacation, I had the same thing happened, someone else DM me on Twitter doing the exact same thing. It's like, you know, you think you'd fool me once or whatever. So immediately blocked the account, reported it, all that stuff. So there's some scammers out there. People are trying to DM you on Twitter about advertising on your YouTube channel. Do not open up any files. Just avoid that at all costs if they're going to email you anything.
You mentioned that you did a bit of an explainer about it. It is a thing that you do quite regularly on your channel. It is a piece of this that I think is very, going back to what we said about paying it forward, about showing people the road. It is a thing that you do regularly that I think is important. Let people know where to find this stuff, both those explainers and the 30 to 40 to 50 interviews you're doing every month. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, if you think I'm just going to end here by plugging everything and not thanking you for having me on, you are sorely mistaken, Spencer. Thank you for having me on. You're one of the OGs in the sport. I hope people realize how long you've been putting in the work and doing what you're doing, and you're still here. That's the big thing. Like, a lot of people have come and gone in this industry, and there's very few of us who have been here more than a decade. So I think that speaks to the work that you do, and so many others have done that are still, you know, covering the sport. So thank you for having me on. I love doing this stuff because I'm usually the guy asking the questions. Now it's nice to, you know, kind of turn the other shoe around, so to speak. But Lynch on Sports, that's the biggest thing. YouTube, Instagram. So it's youtube.com/Lynch on Sports, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. It's all Lynch on Sports, one handle. You mentioned the 50 outlets or whatever it is I work for. I think it's 12 now, 13 actually now that I think about it. But I put all my interviews in a playlist. So I sell my interviews to outlets. That's how I make my living. But I always put the interviews in a playlist on my channel so they're easy to find. I also put interview clips from those interviews on my channel as well that links to the full interview, just to give people an idea of who I'm interviewing and all that stuff as well. But yeah, Lynch on Sports, all platforms. I'm easy to find. I don't think there's too many James Lynches in the world. So yeah, that's it. And thank you for having me on, Spencer. Really enjoyed it. And keep up the great work, man. I'm watching all the stuff on Severe, and it's cool to see you guys trying out different stuff. So,
of course, I appreciate it. Go follow him and all of the interviews and all of the explainers and all of the stuff that you are going to ask when you see this crystal clear video of how do I get it like this? He's got videos that tell you how to get it like this and all the equipment. It's all in there. They're great. I appreciate you doing this. For James, I'm Spencer. This has been a conversation with. We'll see you next week.